start off with, we should probably have a look at what are sort of the main issues within that video. I think Alistair is very good at summarising things. So I'll maybe shoot to you in a second, but one of the things that came up for me, so we've got the idea of feminists not actually listening to men. Now that's a generalisation, and I want to make it very clear that's a generalisation.
She did. I'm not sure that she made it as a generalisation. She
No,
said she wasn't listening to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was actually very clever by telling it as her own story,
Yes.
rather than making generalisations about everybody else on the planet.
That's actually a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was her story and her experience.
Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. What I linked to that statement, so I made the generalisation and it's entirely not accurate. And so this is an example of a risk within this conversation, is that you can generalise, take specific examples and broaden them. But what I looked at was any person can have a behaviour where they're not listening to groups that they define as their opposition, groups that they have any kind of argument against or point of contention. So it can be that you just hear the noise of that group rather than actually hearing the content of any of their arguments.
One of the things she said about that was she looked for things where she could find fault.
Mm-hmm.
And even when there was no fault, but there appeared to be, she was ready to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
And then she didn't realise until afterwards that was a mistake.
Yeah, makes sense.
You want to turn into the group a bit more, Ross?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Because there's nothing on the screen right now, you see?
That's it, yeah. So yeah, Alistair, you gave a great summary of the last video. Just wondering if you had any similar kind of analysis of this video.
Oh, not really. The video seems pretty self-evident, as in it was a cohesive narrative.
Yeah, makes sense, true. Yeah, cool.
But I think she had the underlying message was a generalisation. The underlying message is that if we're to understand accurately, we need to listen, I was going to say empathetically, but attentively to what people are actually trying to communicate, rather than impose our views on what they might be thinking.
Makes sense.
I mean, that was the point of what she was trying to say, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, we can sometimes filter things and put our own bias on what we're hearing.
And in politics, it happens all the time. You have two opposite ends of the spectrum, no, not opposite end, two moderate ends of the spectrum arguing, and they say you're wrong.
Yep.
It hasn't said he's actually wrong at all, just said you don't agree with my political philosophy,
Yes.
which doesn't say whether he's right or wrong at all.
Yeah. Yep. I love the point she made. Nobody will listen to you more than somebody that transcribes your words.
Very good point.
Yes. Counter-argument to that, thousands of journalists that have jobs right now.
They are actually looking for a soundbite.
They're looking for a soundbite, that's right. You mean
Well, to get on the 6 o'clock news or the 7 o'clock news, most journalists are looking for a soundbite of 3 to 5 seconds, and that's all that's going to go to the news. That if the guy talks for an hour and explains lots of detail, they're not interested in that. They want 3 to 5 seconds that they can say in the news.
Or a headline.
It's like
Or a
sampling.
Sampling, yeah. Sampling, cherry picking, these are all similar concepts.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're a little bit dishonest in they pick the wrong thing that's not a representative sample of the whole discourse. Sometimes they're very clever, and sometimes the pollies deliberately try and create a soundbite to sell a product rather than make sense of it for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And political groups as well, they obviously want to get their message out into the world. Best way to do that is with short
Slogans, yeah.
slogans, statements, memes these days.
Who was it? Turnbull in the last thing. I mean, he was coached that you have a slogan, and whatever anybody asks, you give them the slogan. It was jobs and something else, jobs and wealth and growth, or something like that. He didn't really have a message or couldn't explain anything, he just had a slogan to give.
Because he expected that one thing's going to be quoted, and this to be quoted.
That's right, that's right.
It means there's no meaningful engagement on the political topics, on the social topics.
That's true. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't meaningful discussion, but
It doesn't necessarily get communicated to the masses, and the masses have no ability to engage with it, even if it does actually happen.
they can't engage with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not even bothered to understand it, I think. Because if you listen to some pollies and some scientists wander on about some obscure point, most people would switch off.
Yeah. Well, you made the point that you're not overly political. Yeah, and I would actually argue that I'm not political either. I mean, I've started Politify.org, but I actually would say to pretty much anybody who asks, I'm not actually interested in politics. I'm interested in providing solutions to problems. And many of the solutions I see are social problems. And so I've got as much of a problem-solving interest in solving social problems as I do technical problems.
But what happens is that people tend to look at social problems and filter them through their political presuppositions. And they might be right, but they might also be wrong.
Yeah.
But the point is that the public view of it is that they are clearly filtered. Now, I think what actually goes on in some of the subcommittees where they do go through the detail, and sometimes it's very bipartisan, not factional as would be led to believe, they do have to go through lots and lots and lots of facts. And but then when you get into the loony left versus the rabid right argument, then nobody makes much sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, there's political government departments whose job it is to bring forward factual information and to present it to the politicians.
That's right.
Whether or not they read that, whether or not they understand that, whether or not it suits their existing political position is a whole other matter. But you're right, there is a lot of fact available to them.
And the politicians that I've talked to say that they have to do an awful lot of reading. They do have to process a lot of factual matter, which isn't good 6 o'clock news material.
We're getting a little bit away from the video. I think it's still all relevant and tied to it, and coming from it.
My mind just went straight to the global goal objective of gender equality. So that's not feminine, it's not men's activism, it's just equality. If one's deemed as a weaker sex, then they feel like they're victimised in some way, and obviously the other being the stronger sex gets accused of being, treating the weaker sex as such. Just gender equality seems to be the message through that. And I think that there's been a big step made with identifying the global goals, and it's number 5 out of 16 actual ones is gender equality.
Yes, I think gender equality is more like an example rather than the point in this case. I think equivalence is a better word than equality.
What I'm seeing is that the term equality is kind of binary, as in, you can reduce most concepts down to, the extremes. Totally equal, totally not equal. Right?
Yes.
You can do that, and reality doesn't exist within those extremes. So we've got examples of, female weightlifters, for example. We want to talk about strength. We've got examples of
Female prime ministers.
female prime ministers. We've got examples of men who are very good at cooking, or whatever the stereotype is you want to bring in. You know, you've got all these case studies of people not matching the stereotypes. You know, so you can bring reality in and get rid of the dichotomy that exists within words like equality, equal, not equal. What are some other examples? When you said equal, I sort of thought of some other examples of false dichotomies that seem to exist in this space. Can anyone else think of? Maybe prompt my memory.
I'm not sure what I'm trying to remember.
Just false dichotomies.
My mind went to child abuse accusations. Since I've been talking with some colleagues about how a partner accused them of abusing the children so that they could get custody, and then the court ruled, well, no, this is the third time you accused a partner of doing that. Shame on you, custody goes to a male. Yeah, it's getting a bit predictable with track record now. And I've seen that in many situations as well, where the female just goes, abusing children because I want them. And so it's a case that she touched on as well. And another sort of space that I spend some time in is depression and anxiety, often around males who otherwise are just conditioned to not talk about that. Just go and do the job, earn your bread. That's your job. Don't talk about any problems or dislikes that you have towards the way you're doing that. Just get it done.
That's right. One day he goes behind the shed with a rifle and that's it.
And one day they pop. Because they never felt like there was another option because they were not the forum to talk about other options.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to freely admit that there have been times in my life where I felt that I couldn't talk about things. And whether or not that's connected to me being male, I don't know. At some level, I think it was. I think there was, I'm supposed to be a man, and therefore
Tolerate anything.
Yeah, it's supposed to be tough, supposed to be, you don't cry, it's part of a man, being a man. And I think, see, the thing about me is like a 10-year gap between myself and my sisters, my younger sister. So I didn't really have the experience of seeing the comparison between the way they were treated and the way I was treated, because there's so much of a gap. But I certainly know that there can be that dynamic within a family where male child is treated completely differently to a female child. And it might be in some families that men don't cry, women, if you get emotional, it's expected of you. So there's this sort of social conditioning can happen in response to these stereotypes. The consequence to that, the consequence of that for a man can be catastrophic. That said, it can be catastrophic, for a woman as well, to be told that you're expected to be emotional. So if a woman's actually raising a fuss within a workplace, because there's a genuine problem there, there are maybe examples of
To be more like, she's just an hysterical woman.
yeah.
We're expected to have a family. So where are the kids? What kids? Do I have to do that?
No regrets. Best thing in the world ever, kids you can be proud of.
Yeah.
Haven't always been proud of them all the time.
Yeah, but that was a choice for you, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. So I think maybe that comes under the heading of social pressures to behave a certain way. Live your life in a certain way. Cool. Another thing I got out of it was the idea that argument and counter-argument are not always a contest, or is not a contest. So I'll say that again. Argument and counter-argument is not a contest. And counter-arguments don't necessarily invalidate arguments, so we need to be able to counter the counter. This comes back to an idea of mine, building Politify on the philosophy that an idea should exist until someone finds fault with it, but that fault is an idea, and it should exist until someone finds fault with it.
But an idea that is faulty,
Mm-hmm.
it depends on the kind of fault.
Oh, of course.
I mean, some faults are fatal errors,
Mm-hmm.
in which you basically need to radically modify or replace an idea. And some faults, I mean, if you had to get rid of all the people that were born with some kind of fault,
Mm-hmm.
you'd wipe out everybody pretty much.
Yes.
I mean, democracy itself isn't perfect
Mm-hmm.
because it's built on the opinions of fallible and faulty people. It doesn't mean you get rid of it.
Yeah, just tying this back to the video, the idea there is that, she was presenting an argument that, what are they called, men's rights activists. So a men's rights activist would put forward an idea, and then she would come in with what she believed to be a counter-argument. And on hindsight, she realises that those counter-arguments weren't necessarily invalidating statements. Yet, at the time, she was using them as if they were statements that competed and invalidated the men's
Yes.
rights activists' point of view.
To be forced into the choice of A or B
Yeah,
when you could equally have A and B.
that's a good way of putting it.
I think in logical fallacies there's a name for that.
Yeah, I don't know the term, but I think I've seen that presented.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah, so in this context of Politify, we need the ability to sort that out and tease out what is a counter-argument that is going to be an invalidating statement, and what is simply another idea that can itself be invalidated. So that's part of the technology that I'm creating.
You want to sort that out? Is one of that one for you?
Well, it's the idea of the Socratic web, where argument and counter-argument, nobody can have a monopoly on truth.
Yeah.
Right? So if you analyse the philosophies down to very deep levels, you see that you can't argue, for example, that you're not a brain in a jar somewhere being probed, and what you see as reality isn't a construct. You can't argue away from the idea that you might be in the Matrix, for example. It's impossible to do that philosophically. But presented with the reality that we've got, right? Given that you can't actually prove something, you can only disprove something. There's limits to this.
There's limits to how much you can disprove something too.
Yeah.
The idea that you cannot prove something absolutely is a really interesting one. In first year philosophy, what you do is you sit a student down and you put something in front of him, like a pen, and say, prove that the pen's there. He said, well, I can see it. Well, how do you trust your senses? Blah, blah, blah. And at the end, he cannot prove absolutely that there's a pen there. But
you can provide...
It's a workable assumption that there's actually a pen there.
Yeah, it's a workable assumption. Exactly. So you can't ever completely prove something, but you can, through the Socratic method, you can move further and further away from being wrong about it.
Yes.
So, okay, there's not a pen there, but we've all concluded that there's something that looks like, something we hold in common, that, we've all said it can write, we've all said it can do this, we've all said it's a similar colour.
Yeah.
So there's a level of consensus there that it is a pen. So we can, but then again, how do I know that you're even real right now?
That's right.
So
but then consensus itself isn't absolute either, because you can say, well, we're all here sitting believing that the world is flat, therefore the world must be flat. That's not proof.
Yeah, so through the Socratic method, we're not necessarily proving anything, so nobody has a monopoly on truth, but with that method you can move further and further away from something being wrong in the sense that it's no longer arguably wrong. In other words,
Yes,
there's such a low probability of a certain statement or a certain idea being incorrect that it's not worth worrying about.
Just because you cannot prove it absolutely
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it's a done idea.
Yeah, exactly. And just because we can't prove that we're not all brains in jars doesn't mean we actually are brains in jars.
Yep.
By the way, have I answered your question, or have I just gone and completely confused?
No,
you?
yeah, I get it.
Yeah, you get it. Cool, awesome.
I totally understand.
Nice one. So, another idea that came out of this was the concept of groupthink, and I tag this as an equivalent to tribalism.
Can you say what you mean by groupthink? Because I've heard there's various definitions of that.
Well, I've actually taken her lead from this.
Mhm.
She talked about groupthink, and I think if I remember correctly, she was talking about groupthink in terms of people who identified as feminists who then started a smear campaign against her. And so she was seeing this behaviour as sort of a coordinated group effort to smear her and her name and to ridicule her movie, her documentary, even though some of them hadn't even seen it. Yeah. So she's talking about the groupthink that
Like a herd
was
mentality.
that was leveraged towards doing that.
Tribalism.
Yeah.
The right to belong to
Exactly.
something.
What groupthink is specifically is a tendency not for people to have that echo chamber effect and then go out and oppose things that they think disagree with their consensus view. What groupthink actually is a tendency of small groups of people, like say a committee or a group of teachers at a school or whatever, to come to a collective point of view that might be wrong, but everyone's so invested in their own input into the consensus that people are unlikely to challenge their own views. So her use of groupthink in describing that situation I think was incorrect, because groupthink works in a different way in a much smaller situation. Echo chamber is, I think, a better description of what she was talking about.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's a good distinction to have, groupthink, yeah. Yeah, because I've seen examples of committees and, political parties are an example of this. The political party gets together with a pre-existing philosophy or core set of beliefs, and they don't necessarily ever bother to challenge those.
That's groupthink acting on a bigger level, which I think tends to be quite specific to political parties. I mean, it's not unique to them. Take, for example, any given coal company, and that will have a similar large-scale version of groupthink. But with political parties specifically, I think that...
Did you say coal company?
Coal, as in coal mining companies,
Okay.
or coal power companies.
Just anything that has something in common.
Yes.
Or all the cigarette companies.
Yeah.
But we're trying to sell cigarettes, we want people to smoke.
Yeah, they're all going to have common behaviours.
Yeah.
So it's less about the common behaviour and more about a kind of a widespread delusion. Because groupthink is kind of a delusion, but it's quite small, and it's less about, well, yeah, I suppose groupthink in political parties works in a sort of a similar way to groupthink, but it's more about people getting so invested in the idea of attaining power that they're willing to turn a blind eye to ideas that they know to be incorrect within their party, or to not review their ideas in case they find out that they're wrong. And one of the reasons for that is because in political parties, power, as in chance of getting elected to office, tends to be what they become about rather than their actual core principles. Because the parties that are more about their core principles and less about getting into office tend to be outcompeted by the ones that are more focused on being elected.
But I think that's you have idealists and pragmatists. The people that are extremely idealistic have less chance of being elected because, by definition, they're idealistic and not pragmatist.
So I'm not saying that you're wrong, I'm just interested in the idea. What specifically makes it less likely for an idealist to be elected?
Unless you have ideals that are somehow demonstrably attainable. Like, the Greens in the last 20, 30 years have a history of being the most idealistic party in Australia. At one stage in the 60s, Arthur Coolwell's Labor Party was so idealistic that it cooked itself in government. It never had a fighting chance in elections, even when the Liberal Party was in serious decline.
I'm curious to know what makes you think of the Greens as idealistic in general.
Because their views of the environment. But what's happening...
What about those views?
Well, I'm not saying that they're bad views to have, but what's happened in the last few years, the Greens have become more pragmatic and less idealistic than they used to be.
Oh,
and that's,
okay.
And that's given them actually more political success, I think.
As an outside observer to your conversation between the two of you, I might actually be able to offer the answer to your question where Ross might not be able to answer. I think what would potentially make an ideologist, that would be the correct term, saying that right?
Ideologist or idealist?
Idealist, yeah. So what would make an idealist less effective than a pragmatist? When it comes to a decision point, and the decision is, do I uphold the honour of my ideal, or do I compromise in some way because it's going to get an extra vote, an extra 10 votes, get me into a position where I can perhaps put forward my ideology. If you stick...
Or give an act through Parliament.
Yeah. So in that situation where there's a decision point, the ideologist potentially is going to be on the back foot or on the losing side of that decision-making equation. If you carry that through decisions over time, hundreds and hundreds of decisions, then the outcome is going to be the ideologist is going to be not going to get as far as a pragmatist.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good worked description of the principle that I was trying to underline before.
Okay, sounds good. Alright, just turn my phone off. Okay. Here's a statement. When you begin to humanise your enemy, you yourself may be dehumanised by your own tribe.
You need to dehumanise your enemy.
No, when you humanise your enemy.
Yes,
When you humanise your enemy, you yourself may be dehumanised by your own tribe. And I think that's part of the tribalism sort of psychology. If you're a part of a tribe and you identify with a label, I am a part of that tribe, and then somebody who is within that tribe but is actually saying, hey, we should perhaps listen
Where's
to
your
this other person.
tribalism, boy?
Yeah, where's your tribalism? Well, you're no longer looking like somebody who's in the middle being a defender of your tribe. You're looking like somebody who's actually on the outside now, potentially even casting doubt over your own assertions and assumptions. So in response, the people around you can flip and dehumanise you in order to label you as actually the enemy now. And I've been involved in a large number of online debates and discussions where that has happened. I have a desire to explore both argument and counter-argument. And just as a matter of intellectual exploration, I like to do this. So whenever I see somebody making an assertion online, I'll always want to look at the counter-argument. And of course, sometimes when you do that, you look like the enemy. But it may not actually be the enemy. It may simply be exploring the subject further. But instantly, it gets people's backs up. And they see me as the enemy and attack. I want to attack back. And yeah, this sort of phenomenon is...
That's
have
what
problems in political faith.
That's what Socrates did. I mean, his idea was that a life unexamined is a life not lived. And he says, you can think whatever you like. Why do you think that? Do you have good reasons for thinking that? Oh, you don't have good reasons, then why do you think that?
Yeah, because that's what your friends thought, and you haven't got contrary information. You didn't seek contrary or any information.
Socrates is a very interesting fellow. Some of his stuff on questioning techniques, 2,500 years afterwards, it's still the best stuff that was ever written. Very capable.
Yes, definitely. That's why we're trying to build the Socratic web. So that's one of our projects. Yeah. It's a man named Shane Renner in New South Wales. Yeah, he started a thing called Rebutter, so RBUTR, rebutter.com, and he found through building this software was designed to link any page to any other page that offers a counter-argument. And so it's just a database of links, one page to one page. So argument to counter-argument.
Really good idea.
Yeah.
Plug-in, which basically enables your computer to identify, people trying to defend themselves or people offering additional information. So Google and major search engines will know the world.
And one of the reasons why he developed this was because search engines of the world don't do a very good job of linking you to counter-argument.
It's not what they're designed to do.
No, it's not.
It's designed to make money.
Well, they're designed to link to keywords. The money sometimes came afterwards. In the case of Google, they had to get big first before they could make money. But yeah, so yeah, linking to keywords and of course association to those keywords is more important than counter-argument. Counter-argument is almost a synonym, the opposite of what you're looking for. So search engines don't find that information typically very well. So he developed this thing, Rebutter. But what he's found through doing that is that he's got to a point where it's very difficult to get people to install that plugin, and it's very difficult to get people to contribute the links to that plugin. And so what he's realised is that we need to take a bigger vision, and we need to do this as a global community. And so he's coined this term the Socratic web. And so everywhere there is information presented, everywhere there is ideas presented, social media, websites, anything like that, have this concept of counter-argument be put into it. So he's designed all
That could be
these...
scary. I can imagine one. You look up addiction studies and you get how to buy meth.
Well, yeah, that's one. Yeah, you could look up addiction studies, and then you also could look at, well, the counter-argument to the concept of addiction. Is it really an addiction, or is there a level of choice there? That's another counter-argument to that. The criminality to certain drugs, should this drug be criminalised? Should we instead be treating it as a health issue?
That's a non-involved debate.
Oh, it is, absolutely. I don't mean for us to go into it now. Yeah, absolutely.
It's also about, it's a question of A or B or both.
A or B or both, yeah. So
Yes.
it could be criminalised, also could be treated like a health issue. Yep.
You could have both.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, I'll be thinking on that. I think we've come I think we've done good work on this, this video. Do we perhaps want to go to the next video?